good afternoon again to everyone. It's a beautiful day, and God has blessed us. And today I'm going to ask you to kind of get out of the boat, as it were. The sermon today is about Peter getting out and walking on the water, and I've entitled it Faith and Fear. And I need to put another word in there. Faith, fear, and failure. And 11 who didn't get out of the boat. I think it's important to realize that there's some huge lessons that sometimes it's the obvious that goes overlooked. And there are a lot of lessons in the obvious, and as we were talking about recently, there's an elephant in a room and we're unwilling to discuss it. And even reading the Life Application Bible is talking about this great example of faith that Peter had in getting out and walking on the water. And I would challenge that in a little bit, and we're going to take a look at whether that was an element of faith on Peter's part, or were there other things involved in all of that. But the example that we're looking at is in Matthew chapter 14. And what is so interesting, of course, is that how Jesus, this element of faith that we find here with Peter, with Jesus, it is so matter-of-factly with Christ. For us, it's like, wow, what an incredible miracle, what a thrill of a lifetime to be able to do such a thing as Peter did. But we're going to take a look now here, beginning in verse 22 of Matthew 14. And it says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. Now, first of all, we've got to kind of put this in its setting. Jesus has just fed 5,000 men, and of course now we recognize that in the Jewish culture, or the culture of the day, they didn't count women and children. They only counted men, and basically because men ate separately from the women and children. So there were 5,000, so it was a huge crowd of people that Jesus had fed, and he'd done it on very, very little. We're talking about a few loaves and a few fish. That Jesus had done that, and he had also given an opportunity to learn some things about trusting him and God's provision. Now, also another thing that we find here that I think that we'll find interesting is that Jesus sends them out. Jesus is the one who puts them in this particular boat. It isn't like they set out and saying, we're going to start on this adventure. This is an opportunity of a lifetime, and this is what's going to happen, and this is our decision. No, Jesus says, get rid. Actually, Jesus is saying, get out of my way for a while, because I got some other things I want to do, and I want to do it alone. Actually, what he wanted to do was to go and pray, and he didn't want the disciples there with him at that particular time for whatever reason. But I think there's a lesson in all of that, too, because sometimes we can get caught up with our spiritual crowd so much that we don't have time to be alone with God. And Jesus did that in this regard. So he tells them to go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And I think he probably had to dismiss the crowd. Otherwise, they would have just followed him all over the place. And we talked about being a primary care provider. You can get caught up in other people's dependency upon you so much that you don't have any time. So he again, not only gets rid of the disciples, he gets rid of the crowd as well. He dismisses them and sends them off. And after he had dismissed them, he went up upon the mountainside by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already considerable distance from the land. It was buffeted by waves because the wind was against it. And during the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. Which is the normal thing that you would think. And notice their conclusion. It's a ghost. In this case, or it's a spirit, is the way the King James puts it. And if it's a spirit, what kind of spirit is it? And it's a scary kind of situation. It's kind of like having a hallucination, and all of a sudden, not only do you have the fear of the water, the waves, the wind, and all of that, you got something spiritual going on as well. So they were quite terrified. It's a ghost, they said. They cried out in fear. Now, I really would like to know what they cried out. I know some things that I cry out in my humanity times. They may have had a sailor's vocabulary. That's exactly right. In that particular time, what you say, and I'm going to try to avoid that, and your imagination can run those rough seas. Anyway, but Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And then Peter's response, "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come out to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come," and Peter got down out of the boat. He walked on the water. He came towards Jesus. And when he saw the wind, he was afraid. He began to sink. He cried, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reaches out his hand, caught him, says, "You have little faith." He said, "Why do you doubt?" When they climbed to the boat, the wind died. Now that's kind of the end of the story that we find here. But I'd like for us to go back and look at some of these things that we can learn. One of the things that we learned, and I mentioned it briefly in the introduction, is that to Jesus this is kind of a matter-of-fact kind of situation. It is a matter that Jesus trusted in the Father. Jesus has already made quite a little trip on the water himself, walking on the water. And if any of you have not read the book The Shack, it has a little story in there about a guy trying to walk on the water. And it's really, because it's a novel, but it just kind of sheds some light on that. And so we realize that Jesus is the one, as we've already talked about, that he set up the scenario and told them to head across the sea. And we've talked about the crowd. Now, Jesus brings his disciples, the question, after Jesus had fed them and provided for them, make sure these people had something to eat, what would make you jump to the conclusion that immediately, almost in a sense, that you lose your faith, that he sent them out there to drown? If God has provided, did God just fill them up and get them full and fat so he could take them out in the boat and drown them? I mean, that's kind of a question that we have to ask ourselves when we think about faith, and we think about the fear that we have, and we think also about failure, because there are three elements in there. There's faith, there's fear, and there was failure. And of course, it's kind of like failure depending on how you look at it in this regard. So Jesus has already been walking, and we recognize that Jesus can walk on troubled waters. And that Jesus might even send us into troubled waters. Did he not know? He said, well, I checked with the weatherman, and there's not supposed to be any storms, so just go ahead and it's safe for you to go. Did he not know what was going to happen? I believe that he had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. And I think it's important for us to understand that God can send us into troubled waters should that cause us to lose faith. Can it? Oh, yes, it can. Should it? Well, no. Because of what? We should realize that in terms of God feeding the people before and then the meeting and sending out, this other part of what Scripture tells us, that God has begun a good work in us and that he is able to finish that work. He also tells us, I will never leave you or forsake you.
Our international audience can support our multimedia efforts by subscribing to PayPal, the safe and secure online payment option from eBay in the United States. Donations in the euro currency or other approved currency options are easily processed and received instantly. Show your support for Worldwide Church of God in Fairfield, California, USA. The Worldwide Church of God in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto are located in the San Francisco Bay Area, regarded as the most prosperous region in the United States. We believe Jesus Christ when he proclaimed in Matthew 6:24 that serving God is more important than serving mammon. We welcome everyone to come and worship and fellowship every Saturday at the times listed on your screen and on our website, worldwidechurchofgod.com.